Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't following orders, it's breaking them when lives hang in the balance. In the world of emergency response, where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, one paramedic's refusal to obey her team leader's direct commands seemed like career suicide. Her colleagues watched in shock as she threw away years of training and protocol to chase what appeared to be a reckless hunch. They thought she had lost her mind. Her supervisor threatened disciplinary action. The emergency coordinator called her insubordinate. But when the dust settled and the final casualty count was tallied, everyone would realize that her defiance hadn't just saved lives, it had prevented one of the worst disasters in the city's history. This is the story of how breaking the rules became the most important decision anyone had ever made. Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other paramedics at Metro Emergency Services. While her colleagues followed protocols to the letter, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to read between the lines of emergency calls. Her instincts had earned her respect from patients and frustration from supervisors who preferred predictable, by-the-book responses to the messy reality of human crisis. The morning of March 15th started like any other shift. Sarah arrived at the station at 6 a.m., her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her uniform crisp and ready for whatever the day might bring. She had been working emergency response for 8 years, ever since she graduated from the paramedic program at 22. Now 30, she had seen everything from heart attacks in grocery stores to multi-car accidents on busy highways. The team leader that morning was Marcus Webb, a 15-year veteran who ran his squad with military precision. Webb believed in chains of command, standard operating procedures, and never deviating from established protocols. He had made it clear from day one that creativity in emergency response was dangerous, that following the rules kept everyone safe, and that questioning his decisions was not tolerated. Sarah respected Webb's experience, but she had learned to trust her instincts even when they contradicted standard procedure. Her ability to sense what others missed had saved lives before, though it had also earned her several reprimands for unauthorized actions. The first call of the day came in at 7:37 a.m. A construction worker had fallen from scaffolding at a downtown building site. Standard response: 1 ambulance, basic life support, transport to the nearest hospital. Webb assigned Sarah and her partner Jake Rodriguez to handle it. When they arrived at the scene, Sarah immediately noticed something was wrong. The construction foreman seemed nervous, constantly checking his watch and avoiding eye contact. The other workers clustered together, whispering among themselves and glancing toward the building's upper floors. The injured worker, a man named David Chen, was conscious, but seemed more concerned about something other than his injured leg. "We need to get out of here," Chen kept repeating as Sarah examined his fracture. "Something's not right about this building. The supports, they're not what they're supposed to be." Sarah's partner Jake focused on stabilizing the leg injury, but Sarah found herself listening to Chen's seemingly delirious warnings. According to protocol, they should treat the injury, load him into the ambulance, and transport him to the hospital. But something in Chen's voice, something in the way the other workers behaved, made her pause. "What do you mean the supports aren't right?" Sarah asked quietly while Jake prepared the stretcher. Chen grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "I've been doing construction for 20 years. I know good steel when I see it, and I know bad steel too. This building, they use substandard materials. The weight distribution is all wrong. I was trying to document it when I fell. The whole thing could come down." Jake called for her to help lift Chen onto the stretcher, but Sarah hesitated. She looked up at the 40-story building rising above them, its glass facade gleaming in the morning sun. Hundreds of people worked inside those walls. If Chen was right, if the building was structurally unsound, then everyone inside was in danger. But Chen was also a man who had just fallen 30 feet and hit his head. His concerns could be the result of his injury, confusion from the trauma, or even hallucinations. Following protocol meant trusting medical training over the ramblings of an injured patient. They transported Chen to Metro General Hospital, where Sarah continued to think about his warnings. While Jake completed the paperwork, she found herself researching the building on her phone. The 40-story Meridian Tower had been completed just 6 months ago, designed to house corporate offices and government agencies. The construction company, Pinnacle Development, had been awarded the contract after submitting the lowest bid. Something nagged at Sarah about that detail. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. She thought about Chen's certainty, the fear in his voice, the way the other construction workers had avoided talking to the emergency responders. Back at the station, Sarah approached Webb about her concerns. She found him in his office reviewing duty rosters and drinking his third cup of coffee of the morning.
Webb, I think we might have a problem, she began carefully.
He looked up from his paperwork, already showing signs of irritation. What kind of problem, Martinez? The construction worker we transported this morning, David Chen. He was saying some things about the building where he fell. He thinks there might be structural problems. Webb's expression hardened. So a guy who fell off scaffolding and hit his head is now our expert on building safety? That's not our job, Martinez. We transport patients, we don't investigate construction complaints. But what if he's right? There are hundreds of people working in that building. If there's even a chance. If there's a chance of what? Webb interrupted. That a delirious patient knows more about structural engineering than the city's building inspectors? Come on, Martinez. You're smarter than that. Sarah felt the familiar tension that arose whenever she tried to push beyond standard procedures. Maybe we should at least report it to someone. Building and safety, or absolutely not. Webb stood up from his desk, his voice taking on the tone he used when establishing authority. We are not going to create a panic based on the confused statements of an injured man. We did our job. We transported the patient safely. Case closed. But Webb? Case closed, Martinez. And I don't want to hear any more about this. We have real emergencies to worry about. Sarah left Webb's office feeling frustrated but not surprised. She had been down this road before, butting heads with supervisors who prioritized following rules over following instincts. But she couldn't shake the memory of Chen's voice, the fear in his eyes, the way he had grabbed her arm with such desperate urgency. The rest of the morning passed with routine calls. An elderly woman experiencing chest pains who turned out to be having an anxiety attack. A teenager who had cut his hand while working in his family's restaurant. A minor fender bender where both drivers were more concerned about their insurance rates than their minor injuries. During lunch break, Sarah found herself researching Pinnacle development online. What she discovered made her stomach tighten with anxiety. The company had been involved in 3 previous projects where cost overruns had led to the use of cheaper materials. In one case, a warehouse had collapsed during a snowstorm, though fortunately it was empty at the time. In another, a bridge had developed stress fractures within a year of completion. Each time, Pinnacle Development had managed to avoid serious legal consequences through settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The pattern suggested a company more concerned with profit margins than public safety. Sarah's research was interrupted by Jake, who slumped down in the chair across from her. "You're still thinking about the construction guy, aren't you?" he said, unwrapping his sandwich. "Aren't you?" Jake shrugged. Head injuries make people say crazy things. Remember that car accident victim last month who kept insisting aliens had caused the crash? Sometimes people just need someone to blame. This felt different, Sarah said. Chen wasn't confused or disoriented. He was scared, but he was lucid, and the way the other workers were acting. So, what are you going to do about it? Webb made it pretty clear he doesn't want to hear any more theories. Sarah stared at her untouched lunch, knowing that Jake was right but unable to let go of her concerns. I don't know yet. The afternoon brought more routine calls, but Sarah found it difficult to concentrate. Every time they drove past the Meridian Tower, she found herself looking up at its gleaming facade and thinking about the people inside. Office workers typing at their desks, security guards making their rounds, cleaning crews preparing for the evening shift. At 3 p.m., their radio crackled with a new call. Unit 7, respond to Meridian Tower, 42nd floor, chest pains, middle-aged male, conscious and alert. Sarah's heart rate spiked. They were being called to the very building Chen had warned about. As they drove through downtown traffic, she wondered if this was coincidence or if the universe was trying to tell her something. The victim was Robert Henley, a 55-year-old accountant who worked for a government auditing firm. He was sitting at his desk, pale and sweaty, complaining of pressure in his chest and shortness of breath. His symptoms were consistent with either a heart attack or severe anxiety. While Jake took Henley's vital signs and prepared for transport, Sarah found herself examining the office space around them. The walls seemed solid, the floors level, the ceiling properly supported, but Chen's words echoed in her mind, and she found herself looking for signs of structural stress. "Is everything okay up here?" she asked one of Henley's co-workers, a young woman named Lisa who had called for the ambulance.
"What do you mean? Any problems with the building?"
"Weird noises, cracks in the walls, anything like that." Lisa looked puzzled by the question. "Not that I've noticed." "Why do you ask?" Before Sarah could answer, Jake called for her help loading Henley onto their stretcher. As they waited for the elevator, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. A hairline crack ran along the wall near the elevator doors, so thin it was almost invisible. It could have been a normal settling crack, the kind that appeared in most buildings over time, but it could also be a sign of structural stress. During the elevator ride down, Henley's condition stabilized, and he began talking to distract himself from his anxiety. "I've been working in this building since it opened," he said. "Never had problems like this before. But lately, I don't know, something feels different. The building seems to sway more in the wind. Sometimes I hear creaking sounds during storms." Sarah and Jake exchanged glances. "Does the building management know about these issues?" Sarah asked. "I mentioned it to security once, but they said all tall buildings move a little. Said it was perfectly normal." Henley paused, thinking. "But I've worked in tall buildings my whole career, and this feels different somehow." They transported Henley to the hospital, where tests revealed he was experiencing stress-induced chest pains rather than a heart attack. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what he had said about the building's movement and the strange sounds. Back at the station, she approached Webb one more time. "Webb, I think we need to talk about the Meridian Tower." His face immediately showed irritation. "Martinez, I thought I was clear about this. We're not building inspectors." "I know, but hear me out. We just transported someone from that building, and he mentioned unusual movement and sounds, combined with what Chen said this morning. Chen, who had a head injury, and Henley, who was having a panic attack. Great sources, Martinez. Really reliable witnesses. What if they're both right? What if there really is something wrong with that building?" Webb stood up and walked around his desk to face her directly. "What if you're wrong and we cause a massive evacuation based on nothing? What if we create panic that damages people's livelihoods and destroys property values? What if we end our careers by crying wolf over the paranoid fantasies of injured patients?" Sarah felt her resolve wavering under Webb's logical arguments, but something deep in her gut refused to let go of her concerns. "So we just ignore it? We follow protocol. We respond to medical emergencies. We transport patients safely. We let other professionals handle other problems. That's how the system works, Martinez. And it works because everyone stays in their lane. And if the system is wrong this time, then that's not our responsibility." Webb's voice carried a finality that made it clear the conversation was over. "I don't want to hear about this again, Martinez. Focus on your actual job." Sarah left his office feeling more isolated than ever, but also more convinced that her instincts were right. She had learned over the years to distinguish between genuine intuition and wishful thinking, and everything about this situation screamed danger. The problem was that her concerns were based on fragments of information, patient statements that could be explained by medical conditions, and a gut feeling that had no scientific basis. Against the weight of protocol, hierarchy, and reasonable doubt, her instincts seemed fragile and unreliable. But as Sarah prepared for the end of her shift, she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to trust her instincts, even if it meant going against direct orders, even if it risked her career, even if she was wrong. The building and its occupants deserved at least one person willing to ask the difficult questions, even if everyone else was satisfied with easy answers. Sarah didn't know yet what she was going to do, but she knew she had to do something. The foundation of her conflict with Webb was now firmly established. On one side stood protocol, reason, and respect for authority. On the other stood intuition, responsibility, and the willingness to risk everything to protect people who had no idea they might be in danger. Sarah's choice would determine not just her own future, but the fate of everyone working inside the Meridian Tower. And time was running out, faster than anyone realized. That evening, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about David Chen's warnings and Robert Henley's observations. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the Meridian Tower swaying in the wind, its substandard steel supports groaning under stress that was slowly approaching their breaking point. At 2 a.m., she gave up trying to sleep and turned on her laptop. She spent hours researching structural engineering, building codes, and the warning signs of architectural failure. What she learned terrified her. Buildings didn't usually collapse without warning. There were almost always signs. Unusual movement, strange sounds, hairline cracks that gradually widened, and subtle shifts that trained observers could detect. Chen had mentioned all of these things. Henley had noticed unusual swaying and creaking sounds. The hairline crack she had seen near the elevator could be the beginning of something much worse. Individually, these observations might be meaningless. Together, they painted a picture that Sarah couldn't ignore. By morning, she had made her decision. She was going to conduct her own investigation of the Meridian Tower, even if it meant defying Webb's direct orders. Sarah arrived at work early, before the rest of her shift, and used her access to emergency services databases to research the building's construction history. What she discovered made her hands shake as she typed. The building had been completed in record time, 3 months ahead of schedule. The construction company had received bonuses for early completion, creating financial incentives to cut corners. More disturbing, there had been 2 previous incidents involving emergency responders at the building. 6 weeks ago, a security guard had reported feeling dizzy and disoriented on the 38th floor. 3 weeks later, a cleaning woman had called for medical assistance after experiencing what she described as motion sickness while working on the 40th floor. Both incidents had been attributed to individual medical conditions rather than environmental factors. But Sarah now wondered if these people had been sensitive to building movement that others had dismissed or failed to notice. When Webb arrived, Sarah was already reviewing the day's duty assignments. She watched him go through his morning routine, checking equipment, reviewing overnight reports, and preparing for the daily briefing. She knew that once he officially started the shift, any investigation she conducted would be insubordination. But until then, she was technically on her own time. "Martinez, you're here early," Webb observed as he poured his coffee. "Couldn't sleep," she replied truthfully. "Hopefully not, because you're still obsessing over yesterday's conspiracy theories." Sarah forced herself to smile. "Just wanted to get a head start on the day." Webb seemed satisfied with her answer and disappeared into his office. Sarah waited until she was sure he was occupied with paperwork, then quietly gathered her emergency medical kit and headed for the door. Her first stop was Metro General Hospital, where she hoped to find David Chen. She told the reception desk that she was following up on a patient transport, which was technically true, though not the whole truth. Chen was in room 412, his leg elevated and immobilized, but his mind sharp and alert. When Sarah knocked on his door, his face showed both surprise and relief. "You came back," he said. "I didn't think anyone believed me." "I'm not sure what I believe yet," Sarah admitted. "But I think you deserve to be heard. Tell me everything you remember about the building's construction." Chen's story was detailed and disturbing. As a senior construction worker with 2 decades of experience, he had been hired by Pinnacle Development specifically because of his expertise in steel frame construction. But from the first day on the job, he had noticed irregularities. "The steel beams were lighter than they should have been," he explained. "When you've worked with structural steel as long as I have, you can tell the difference just by looking. These beams looked right, but they felt wrong. The thickness was off, the weight distribution wasn't what it should be." Chen had raised his concerns with the construction foreman, but was told that the materials met all building codes and specifications. When he persisted, he was warned that questioning the project materials could cost him his job. "I needed the work," Chen admitted. "My daughter was starting college, and I couldn't afford to be unemployed. So I kept quiet and did my job. But I also started documenting everything." Chen reached into his bedside table and pulled out a small digital camera. "I took pictures of the beam markings, the welding joints, anything that didn't look right. I was going to turn them over to the building inspector when the project was finished." Sarah's heart raced as she realized the significance of what Chen was telling her. "Do you still have these pictures?" "They're on here," Chen said, holding up the camera. "But I never got the chance to show them to anyone. The day before the building was finished, I was taking some final documentation photos when my safety harness failed. I fell 30 feet and ended up here." The implication was chilling. Had Chen's fall been an accident, or had someone sabotaged his equipment to prevent him from exposing the building's flaws? "Can I see the pictures?" Sarah asked. Chen handed her the camera, and Sarah scrolled through dozens of images showing construction details that meant nothing to her untrained eye. But Chen's commentary made their significance clear. Weld joints that were incomplete, support beams that were thinner than specifications required, and corner cutting that violated basic engineering principles. "This building should not be occupied," Chen said with absolute certainty. "It might hold up under normal conditions, but any kind of stress, high winds, seismic activity, even just the weight of too many people on the upper floors, could cause catastrophic failure." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of stress would it take? Hard to say exactly, but we're coming into storm season. A strong windstorm could set up harmonic vibrations that these supports can't handle. Or if there was ever an earthquake, even a small one. Chen trailed off, the implications too terrible to voice. Sarah thanked Chen and promised to take his concerns seriously. As she left the hospital, she carried with her the digital camera containing evidence that could save hundreds of lives, if anyone would listen to her. Her next stop was the city's Building and Safety Department, where she hoped to find someone willing to investigate her concerns. The receptionist directed her to Inspector Margaret Torres, a 20-year veteran who specialized in high-rise construction. Torres listened politely as Sarah explained her concerns, but her expression grew increasingly skeptical as the story progressed. So you have photos taken by an injured construction worker who may have had reasons to be disgruntled with his employer? Torres summarized when Sarah finished. The photos showed clear violations of building codes, Sarah insisted. Photos that I would need to have authenticated by experts, which would take weeks. And even if the photos are genuine, we would need to conduct our own inspection to verify any problems. How long would that take? For a building that size? Months. We would need to examine the structural integrity of every floor, test the materials, and verify that the construction matches the approved plans. It's not something we can do overnight. Sarah felt her frustration growing. But what if there's immediate danger? What if the building could collapse? Torres leaned back in her chair, her patience clearly wearing thin. Miss Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but you have to understand our position. We can't shut down a 40-story office building based on the suspicions of a paramedic and the photos of a disgruntled construction worker. The economic impact alone would be enormous. The human impact of a collapse would be worse. If there was a collapse, which is extremely unlikely, this building was inspected during construction and certified safe for occupancy. The engineering firm that designed it has an excellent reputation. The idea that it would suddenly collapse is really quite far-fetched. Sarah left the building and safety department feeling more frustrated than ever. She had evidence, she had witness testimony, and she had professional expertise telling her that people were in danger. But the system designed to protect those people was more concerned with avoiding false alarms than preventing real disasters. Her radio crackled as she walked back to her car. All units respond to traffic accident at 5th and Main. Possible injuries. Sarah realized with a start that she had been gone for over 2 hours. Webb would expect her to respond to the call, but she was nowhere near the station or her assigned vehicle. She quickly called into dispatch. This is Martinez. I'm out of service conducting follow-up on yesterday's patient. The dispatcher's response was immediate and concerned. Martinez, you need to return to service immediately. Webb is looking for you. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had hoped to complete her investigation without Webb discovering her absence, but that hope was now gone. She drove quickly back to the station, rehearsing explanations that sounded increasingly weak, even to her own ears. She found Webb waiting in the garage, his face dark with anger. Where the hell have you been, Martinez? I was following up on the Chen case, trying to what? I told you yesterday that case was closed. I gave you a direct order to drop it. Webb, I have evidence now. Photos showing that the building materials don't meet specifications. If we don't do something, what? You'll single-handedly save the world based on pictures from a disgruntled construction worker? Webb's voice was rising, attracting the attention of other personnel in the garage. It's not just the photos. I talked to building and safety and... You talked to building and safety? Webb's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. You went to city officials with this nonsense? Do you have any idea what you've done? Sarah realized too late that she had made a serious mistake. By involving outside agencies without authorization, she had created the exact kind of interagency incident that could damage Webb's reputation and career. I was trying to protect people, she said weakly. You were trying to play hero instead of doing your job, and now I have to clean up the mess you've created. Webb paused, clearly struggling to control his temper. You're suspended, Martinez. Turn in your radio and your keys. Webb, you can't. I can and I am. You've shown complete disregard for authority. You've wasted city resources on a personal crusade, and you've embarrassed this department with your amateur detective work. You're off duty pending a disciplinary hearing. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Not only had she failed to convince anyone to take action, but she had lost her job and her ability to help if disaster did strike. She handed over her radio and vehicle keys, feeling the stares of her colleagues who had gathered to watch the confrontation. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, it is, Webb replied. Go home, Martinez. Stay home. And pray that your little investigation doesn't cost you your career. As Sarah walked to her personal car, her mind raced with the implications of what had happened. She was now a private citizen with no official authority, no access to emergency equipment, and no credibility with the people who could actually help. But she was also free from the constraints of protocol and chain of command. For the first time since this crisis began, she could act on her instincts without worrying about insubordination or career consequences. The question was, what could one suspended paramedic do against a system that refused to acknowledge the danger she was trying to expose? The answer came to her as she drove home through downtown traffic, passing the Meridian Tower with its gleaming facade and unsuspecting occupants. If the official channels wouldn't listen to her evidence, she would have to find another way to protect the people inside that building, even if it meant taking actions that would be seen as extreme, illegal, or completely crazy by everyone around her, even if it meant destroying whatever remained of her reputation and career. The lives at stake were more important than her personal consequences. Sarah's defiance was now complete. She had crossed the line from concerned professional to rogue actor, and there was no going back. The question was whether her actions would save lives or simply confirm everyone's belief that she had lost her mind. The battlefield that would test her decision was approaching faster than anyone realized, and when it arrived, there would be no time for second thoughts or regrets. Sarah would either be vindicated or destroyed by the choice she was about to make. The evening news was full of ordinary stories, budget debates at city council, traffic updates for the morning commute, weather forecasts that mentioned possible storms later in the week. None of the reporters or viewers had any idea that a former paramedic was planning actions that would either save hundreds of lives or end her own future forever. Sarah spent that night planning her next move, knowing that once she acted, there would be no possibility of returning to her old life. She was about to cross a line that separated legitimate concern from what everyone else would see as criminal behavior. But as she looked at David Chen's photos one more time, studying the substandard materials and dangerous construction shortcuts, she knew she had no choice. Tomorrow, she would take actions that would force everyone to pay attention to the danger she had been trying to expose. The consequences would be swift and severe, but at least she would have tried to save the innocent people who had no idea their lives hung in the balance. Sarah spent the night developing a plan that would force authorities to take her seriously, even if it meant breaking several laws in the process. She studied building schematics online, researched fire alarm systems, and calculated how long it would take to evacuate a 40-story building during business hours. By dawn, she had decided on a course of action that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was going to trigger a false fire alarm in the Meridian Tower, forcing an evacuation that would get people out of the building while she presented her evidence to whoever would listen. She knew this plan would result in criminal charges. False alarms were felonies that carried serious jail time and massive fines. Her career in emergency services would be permanently finished. But if she was right about the building's structural problems, she would rather be a convicted criminal than someone who had stayed silent while hundreds of people died. The plan required precise timing. She needed to trigger the alarm during business hours when the building was fully occupied, but she also needed enough time to present her evidence before being arrested. She decided to act at 10 a.m., when most office workers would be at their desks, but before the lunch rush complicated evacuation procedures. Sarah dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that would help her blend in with office workers in the Meridian Tower. She put David Chen's camera in her purse, along with printed copies of the most damning photographs. She also carried a written statement explaining her actions, hoping it would be read by investigators even if no one listened to her words. At 9:30, she parked 2 blocks away from the Meridian Tower and walked through the downtown business district. The morning was crisp and clear, with no hint of the storms that weather forecasters had predicted for later in the week. Office workers hurried along sidewalks, carrying coffee cups and checking their phones, completely unaware that one woman was about to turn their ordinary day into chaos. Sarah entered the Meridian Tower through the main lobby, her heart pounding as she approached the security desk. She signed in as a visitor to Henley & Associates, the accounting firm where Robert Henley worked. The security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, recognized her from the previous day's medical emergency.
Back to check on Mr. Garrell.
Henley? Frank asked pleasantly. Something like that, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like an eternity. Sarah watched the numbers climb, knowing that each floor brought her closer to the point of no return. When the doors opened, she stepped into the hallway and looked around for the fire alarm pull station. She found it near the elevator bank, a red box behind glass marked "Pull in case of fire." Sarah stood in front of it for a long moment, thinking about everything that would happen once she broke the glass. Police would respond, firefighters would evacuate the building, and she would be arrested for filing a false report. But she would also accomplish her goal of getting people out of a building she believed was dangerous. If she was wrong, she would face the consequences of her mistake. If she was right, she would save lives. Sarah pulled the alarm. The sound was immediate, and deafening. A piercing wail that echoed through the hallways and triggered automatic responses throughout the building. Emergency lights began flashing, and the building's PA system activated with pre-recorded evacuation instructions. Within seconds, office doors began opening as workers emerged into hallways, looking confused but following their emergency training. Sarah watched them file toward the stairwells, moving with the calm efficiency that came from regular fire drills. She followed the crowd toward the stairs, but instead of descending, she waited until the hallway was empty, then took the elevator back down to the lobby. She knew she had perhaps 10 minutes before fire department investigators would begin looking for the person who had triggered the alarm. The lobby was already filling with evacuated office workers, and Frank, the security guard, was coordinating with first responders who were beginning to arrive. Sarah approached him with David Chen's camera in her hands. "Frank, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm the person who pulled that fire alarm, and I did it because this building is in danger of collapse." Frank's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Ma'am, you need to speak to the fire department." "I will, but first I need you to see this." Sarah showed him the camera's display screen, scrolling through Chen's photographs. "These pictures show that the building's steel supports don't meet safety specifications. The construction company used substandard materials." Frank stared at the photos, clearly unsure how to respond to what he was seeing. "I don't understand what I'm looking at. The man who took these photos was David Chen, a construction worker who fell from scaffolding 2 days ago. He was trying to document safety violations when his accident happened." Before Frank could respond, Fire Captain Richard Stone approached them. Stone was a 25-year veteran with Metro Fire Department, a man whose no-nonsense attitude and vast experience made him someone both his colleagues and the public trusted implicitly. "Are you the person who triggered the alarm?" Stone asked Sarah directly. "Yes, sir." "I'm Sarah Martinez, a paramedic with Metro Emergency Services. I pulled that alarm because I believe this building is structurally unsafe." Stone's expression hardened. "Do you understand that filing a false alarm report is a felony?" "It's not a false report if the building is actually dangerous." Sarah handed him the camera. These photographs were taken during construction by David Chen, a structural steel worker. They show clear violations of building codes and the use of substandard materials. Stone examined the camera's display, scrolling through the images while Sarah explained what Chen had told her. Other fire department personnel and police officers began gathering around them as word spread about the situation. "These photos could be from any construction site," Stone said finally. "How do I know they were taken here?" Sarah's heart sank as she realized the weakness in her evidence. The photos showed construction details, but nothing that definitively identified the Meridian Tower as the location. Chen had focused on documenting the materials and workmanship, not on proving where the photos were taken. "David Chen will verify where they were taken," she said desperately. "He's at Metro General Hospital. You can ask him yourself." "I intend to," Stone replied, "but right now I have an evacuation to manage and a crime to investigate. Officer Jackson, please place Miss T-Bay Martinez under arrest for filing a false alarm report." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Sarah felt a mixture of despair and determination. She had gotten people out of the building, but she had failed to convince anyone that they needed to stay out. Within hours, the evacuation would be declared a false alarm. People would return to their offices, and the danger would remain. "Captain Stone," she said as Officer Jackson read her rights, "at least keep the building closed until you can verify the photos. Please." Stone's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint that he might be taking her seriously. "We'll investigate your claims, Ms. Darmat Martinez. But if you're wrong about this, you're looking at serious jail time. If I'm wrong, I'll accept whatever consequences come. But if I'm right, and something happens to those people..." Stone nodded grimly and turned to coordinate with his team. Sarah was led to a police car, where she sat in the back seat watching the evacuation proceed. Hundreds of office workers milled around the street outside the Meridian Tower, most of them checking their phones or chatting with colleagues as they waited for the all-clear to return to work. None of them knew that their safety might depend on whether fire department investigators believed the warnings of a paramedic who had risked everything to get their attention. Over the next hour, Sarah watched from the police car as investigators entered and exited the building. Fire department personnel conducted their standard sweep for actual fire hazards, while police detectives began the process of investigating her claims about structural defects. Captain Stone returned to the police car at 11:30, his expression unreadable. "We contacted David Chen at the hospital," he told her through the window. He confirmed that the photos were taken at this building site, and he gave us a detailed statement about his concerns regarding the construction materials. So you believe us? I believe that Chen has legitimate concerns based on his professional experience. We're bringing in a structural engineer to examine the building, but that process will take several hours. Are you going to let people back in before then? Stone paused, clearly wrestling with a difficult decision. That's above my pay grade. The building owner is demanding that we end the evacuation immediately. The mayor's office is getting calls from every business in the tower, complaining about lost productivity. Everyone wants this situation resolved quickly. And if the building collapses while they're resolving it quickly, then we'll all have to live with the consequences of our decisions. Stone walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her fears about what would happen next. She could see city officials gathering near the building's entrance, engaged in heated discussions about liability, economics, and public safety. The longer the evacuation continued, the more pressure there would be to declare it a false alarm and return to normal operations. At noon, Sarah's worst fears were realized. She watched as Captain Stone emerged from the building and approached the crowd of evacuated workers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've completed our investigation of the alarm," he announced through a megaphone. "There is no fire hazard in the building, and you may return to your offices. We apologize for the inconvenience." Sarah felt sick as she watched hundreds of people file back into the building. They moved with the casual confidence of people who believed their safety was guaranteed by building codes and government oversight. None of them knew that their lives might depend on the structural integrity of steel supports that an experienced construction worker believed were fatally flawed. "What about the structural inspection?" Sarah called to Stone as he passed near the police car. "The engineer will examine the building this afternoon," he replied. "But we can't keep it closed based on speculation. The building has been certified safe by city inspectors. Those inspectors didn't have Chen's photos or his testimony. No, they didn't. But they also didn't have your history of insubordination and conspiracy theories." Sarah realized with horror that Webb had shared information about her suspension and her previous conflicts with authority. Instead of lending credibility to her concerns, her track record was being used to undermine them. "Please," she said desperately, "at least reduce occupancy until the inspection is complete. Don't let the upper floors fill to capacity." Stone considered her request for a moment. "I'll recommend reduced occupancy, but I can't enforce it. The building management will make that decision." Sarah was transported to the county jail, where she was processed and placed in a holding cell to await her arraignment. From her cell window, she could see the Meridian Tower in the distance, its gleaming facade giving no hint of the potential danger within. The afternoon passed slowly as Sarah waited for news about the structural inspection. Every hour that passed increased her anxiety about the people working in those upper floors, unaware that their safety might be compromised by construction shortcuts and substandard materials. At 4 p.m., a guard informed her that she had a visitor. Sarah was escorted to a meeting room where she found Jake Rodriguez waiting for her. "The whole department is talking about what you did," Jake said without preamble. "Webb is furious, but some of the older guys are saying you might be onto something." "What about the structural inspection?"
That's why I'm here.
"The engineer found problems, Sarah. Serious problems." Sarah's heart raced. "What kind of problems?" "The steel supports on floors 35 through 40 don't match the building specifications." Chen was right about the substandard materials. "The engineer says the building can probably handle normal loads, but it's vulnerable to lateral stress from high winds or seismic activity." "So they're evacuating the building?" "The building owner got an injunction preventing the city from ordering an evacuation. They're arguing that the defects aren't immediately dangerous and that proper repairs can be made while the building remains occupied." Sarah felt a chill of dread. They're gambling with people's lives to avoid economic losses. It gets worse. The Weather Service just issued a high wind warning for tonight. Gusts up to 70 miles per hour expected between 8 p.m. and midnight. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Chen had warned that high winds could create harmonic vibrations that would stress the building's compromised supports beyond their capacity. If the building was going to collapse, tonight would be when it happened. "Jake, you have to get people out of that building. Use your radio, call in bomb threats, fire alarms, anything to get them evacuated before the storm hits." "I can't do that, Sarah. I'd lose my job and face the same criminal charges you're facing. Better to lose your job than to watch hundreds of people die." Jake looked torn between loyalty to his friend and fear for his own career. The wind warning might be enough to convince building management to reduce occupancy voluntarily. Maybe they'll close the upper floors as a precaution. And maybe they won't. "Jake, I need you to promise me something." If that building starts showing signs of stress tonight, if there are any reports of unusual movement or sounds, you get people out regardless of what anyone tells you." Jake nodded slowly. "I promise." "But Sarah, you need to understand that even if you're right about the building, your career is over. Webb is recommending termination, and the department won't support someone who breaks the law to make a point." "I know. But if those people survive the night because of what I did, it'll be worth it." After Jake left, Sarah returned to her cell and waited for news. She had done everything she could to protect the people in the Meridian Tower. Now their fate depended on the decisions of building managers, city officials, and the natural forces that would test the building's structural integrity when the storm arrived. At 8 p.m., the wind began to pick up outside the jail windows. Sarah watched the trees bending in increasingly strong gusts, knowing that the same forces were now acting on the Meridian Tower's compromised frame.
At 9:15, her worst fears were confirmed.
A guard brought her a portable radio tuned to emergency frequencies where she heard the first reports of trouble at the Meridian Tower. Unit 7, respond to Meridian Tower, reports of building movement on upper floors. Units 4 and 6, respond to Meridian Tower, multiple calls reporting unusual sounds and vibrations. All units, establish perimeter around Meridian Tower. Possible structural emergency. Sarah listened in growing horror as the radio traffic intensified. The building was showing exactly the signs of stress that Chen had predicted, and emergency responders were finally taking action to protect its occupants. At 9:47, she heard the transmission that confirmed her worst fears and her greatest vindication. "Command, this is Captain Stone. We're ordering immediate evacuation of Meridian Tower. The building is showing signs of imminent structural failure." Through her cell window, Sarah could see emergency vehicles converging on the downtown area, their lights flashing against the storm-darkened sky. The evacuation she had tried to force 12 hours earlier was finally happening, but now it was a race against time and weather. The radio continued its stream of urgent updates as hundreds of people fled the swaying tower. Emergency personnel worked floor by floor, ensuring that no one was left behind as the building's movements became increasingly violent. At 10:23 p.m., the final evacuation was confirmed. Every person had been safely removed from the Meridian Tower just as the wind reached its peak intensity. 18 minutes later, Sarah heard the sound that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. The thunderous crash of a 40-story building collapsing into the street below. The Meridian Tower was gone, its substandard steel supports finally overwhelmed by forces they were never designed to handle. The collapse sent debris flying for blocks in every direction, crushing parked cars and shattering windows in adjacent buildings, but the building was empty. Every single person who might have died in the collapse was safe because of the emergency evacuation that Sarah's actions had ultimately made possible. The battlefield had revealed the truth of her warnings, but more importantly, it had proven that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to save lives. In the days that followed, Sarah would be hailed as a hero by the media and the families of those she had saved. The criminal charges against her would be dropped, and she would be offered her job back with commendations for her courage and dedication. But she would always remember that her vindication came at a terrible price: the loss of a magnificent building, millions of dollars in damage, and the realization that sometimes the system designed to protect people could be its own worst enemy. Webb would eventually apologize to her, admitting that his adherence to protocol had nearly caused a disaster. The Emergency Services Department would revise its procedures to allow for investigations based on credible witness testimony, even when that testimony challenged official conclusions. David Chen would become a key witness in the criminal investigation of Pinnacle Development, helping to ensure that the responsible parties faced justice for their dangerous cost-cutting measures. And Sarah would return to work with a deeper understanding of when to follow orders and when to trust her instincts, knowing that the most important decisions she would ever make might be the ones that seemed wrong to everyone else at the time. The battlefield had tested her judgment and found it sound, but it had also taught her that being right wasn't always enough. Sometimes you had to be willing to sacrifice everything you valued to protect what mattered most: the lives of innocent people who depended on others to make the right choice when it counted.